Okay, so here we go. We're going to, now that we got Max set up, now remember to make sure that you come up under Customize, that you've gone to Unit Setup, and then under this System Unit Setup, it'll default to inches. Be sure you put it to centimeters, and then this will default to generic units. This sets the scale of the world, and this sets what's on our ruler, the measurement of the rulers. We want to use U.S. standard, and I prefer feet with decimal inches. You can do feet with fraction inches, but then you're typing in a 16th of an inch and an eighth of an inch and a 32nd of an inch. I'd rather do decimals. Okay, so first thing we're doing here is, this is a tutorial, just kind of go over the process. You're going to be building rooms. So we'll just start off by building a floor. So we're building a box. So we're going to our create panel, just click and hold down and drag, and then let up on the mouse and push upwards, and then click and right click to stop. Okay, F3 turns your wireframe view on and off. F4 turns the shaded with the wire on and off. And so there we go. Now we're going to go ahead and put some material on this. Okay, now to tumble around, in case you forget, it's the Alt key, center mouse button is tumble. Okay, don't hold the Alt key, center mouse button moves, and then scrolling the center mouse button in and out is zoom. And then you can fit to the screen, and if you hit Z, it'll fit to your screen. Okay, if you want to turn the grid off, that's G. So Max is pretty good about the first letter of whatever the speed key we want to use being the first letter. Okay, as an example, we want to build a material for this, so that would be M on the keyboard, and so that would bring out the material editor, which mine popped off the screen because I have multiple screens. Okay, and these are your materials and maps over here. And then our information will pop over here. We're going to use a physical material, so you just drag and drop it out here. And we're context sensitive, which means when we pick this, its controls will show up over here. So we're creating a floor. So we want to go in here, and let's go ahead, pick it, and then you can right click on this to assign the material to it. We want to name our stuff. Okay, so to name your object here, you can name it here in the top right hand corner. You can also name it over here. This is called our outliner over here. I have it, by the way, I have it set for hierarchy, layers. It by default's to hierarchy, but we're going to, organize things in layers. So we go to layers. And then if I just click on it right there, I can rename it. We'll call this floor. So like I said, you can rename it here, or you can rename it over here. Either one, it doesn't matter. Okay. All right, when we first come in here, this material, when you first come in, it's set up as being highly reflective, and so we want to turn that down. It's kind of like really shiny porcelain tiles is what it's like. So reflection is how reflective it is, how much it's going to be reflecting light. So we're going to turn that down so it's not really, really reflective. And then roughness is when light hits it and it's reflecting it, does it bounce right directly off like a mirror and come back to us, or does it scatter more like cloth? Okay, so we're going to turn the roughness up so it's more rough. We'll do 0.6. Okay, you can also double click on the little icon here, and that will pull it up larger. Okay, and we want to name our material too, so we're going to call this wooden floor. Okay, now let's get our floor the correct size. Now, if I right click and I go to move right here, if you'll look down here at the bottom, okay, there's X, Y, and Z. And so we can actually move it by dragging these. That's moving on the X, and this is moving on the Y. Okay, and this is moving on the Z, which is up and down. Okay, these little arrows on the end, if you right click on those, they'll zero out. So what we're going to do is right click on all those to center it to our world. So now it's in the center of our world. Okay. All right, so you can change viewports. okay, by hitting V for viewports, and then you can pick which viewport that you want to look at. All right. Now, we really don't want to use this view cube. This kind of confuses people a lot, so I prefer to tell people just to turn it off at first. Later, you can turn it back on if you know how to use it, but it confuses people, okay? Because if I click on this to say, if I'm in the perspective view, okay, and I click on this to go to the right, to the front view, it's not a front view. It's a front view of a perspective view, but it's not the front view. Like if I hit V and I go to front view, you'll see that's an orthographic view. That's a true front view. So this kind of throws people off, and they end up, making things and screwing them up because of that. So I would just tell you, there's a little dot right here. Just right click on this, configure, and just uncheck that and turn that off, because we don't really need it. Okay. We tumble around Alt center mouse button. Okay. Now, another thing I would do is down here in the bottom right hand corner, follow my mouse way down here in the bottom right hand corner. These are your viewport tools. Now, the bottom row, second one from the right. Okay. If you click and hold down, these have flyouts. Okay. And it defaults to rotating around the center of the world. But after a while, that gets a little bit hard, because I'm wanting to rotate around other things. So if you click and hold this, and we want the bottom one, it looks like a little Saturn. It's a little green dot with a ring around it. Now, what that does is when I hold down the Alt key and I click, it drops a little green dot on it, and it rotates around that. So if I want to rotate around this end, I can rotate around this end. I can rotate around that end. Okay. So I'm just holding down the Alt key, and as soon as I click wherever the mouse is, it puts a dot there and it rotates around that. And so if I want to rotate around the center, then I just put the dot around the center. Okay. All right. So we create things on the create panel. Okay. Like creating here, creating a light. We'll create a light in a few minutes. Okay. And this is our modify. So we go here. This is the modify. And we have what's called a modifier stack. So we have all of these things. These are all, you can kind of think of these as like filters in Photoshop, that we're running filters on thing, or adjustment filter in Photoshop, because these can all be dropped on, adjusted, and deleted. Okay. So what we want to do is, when we're in the modify panel, is now we can come down here and we can start changing how big this is. Okay. So we're making a floor for a typical kind of room. And so we're going to say that this is, it's made out of wood. We're going to make this out of wood. So the height is how thick it is. We'll just make it 1 inch. Okay. So 1 inch. Now, a lot of people may not understand feet and inches, because you maybe hadn't done much, okay, what is that giving me? Done much carpentry or whatever. Okay. So the first, slot is feet, okay, and the second one is inches, and the third one is tenths of an inch. All right, so our width, we just highlight the whole thing, and if I type in 14, that's going to be 14 feet. The length, we're going to highlight and do 20, and we're going to do 20 feet, okay. If you click off of it and hit F on the keyboard, that will frame that in. I'm sorry, not F, but Z. Some softwares, it's F, okay, for frame, but in Macs it's Z for zoom. Okay, so there is our floor, okay, and so 1 inch thick, 14 inches deep, and 19 inches, 20. And this throws people off too, because we typed in 20 and then it goes 19, 12, okay. Yes. There are 12 inches in a foot, so 20 feet is 19 feet and 12 inches, which is 20 feet. Okay, so it kind of throws people off sometimes. Okay, there we go. All right, so on our material now. So we're going to come in here and do material. So we're going to want to put some wood on here. So we're going to want to go to a browser. Let me pull a browser in here. And we want to search for some texture maps. So let's just go in here and let's just type in wood. And we want this to be tileable. So let's go ahead and type in tileable wood texture. Titleable wood texture. Okay, and then we want to go to images. Now, it's got a lot of images in here, but a lot of these images we can't or don't want to use, okay? Because some of the things is we don't know how big these are, and some of these are to places, our stock photo places where we have to pay for them, okay? So the first thing we want to do is go up here and isolate this. So go up here to Tools, and this little pop-up right in here, and say Large. That way it's only going to show me large quality images. And then under usage rights right here, I want to go Creative Commons, and that means non-copyrighted material, okay? All right, so we can choose these. Now, the thing you want to choose is ones that are square, okay? We don't want ones that are not square. Can we use non-square ones? We can, but our life is easier if we use square ones, okay? So I'm not going to go with this one. Now, I would tell you to not just save this image from here. What you want to do is right-click on this and go Image in a new tab, and that way you can see the quality of it. Because a lot of times I come in here, and what happens is people they'll take an image and then they'll enlarge it in Photoshop, and so it's really pixelated and it's not good. Okay. So now we want to go ahead and save this. So I'm just going to right click and save this image. Okay. And then where I'm going to save it is it needs to go into your Scene Assets Images folder. So you need to make sure that you've already set up a folder for this. Okay. So if you hadn't set up a folder, we'll just do this really quick. I'll just make a new one here so it's easy. So I'm just going to right click, make a new folder, and we'll call this wood floor. This is our wood floor. It's what I'm going to call it. What you'd really want to do is you'd want to do it for our class. So you would just name this folder our class, and you'd want to put it on the cloud. That way you can access it from home. Okay. All right. So you'll see this is blank. So if I go back into Max and I go File, and I'm going to go down to Project and create a default project. And then I'm going to find my way back to that folder. And then I'm going to select it. Then what that did was, let's see, where did I go? I put it, documents. Here, and there's all my folders. Okay, so there's all the folders it created for me. The ones you need to pay attention to most are auto back. That's where it's going to save auto backup files. Scenes is where it's going to save my scenes file, and then Scene Assets Images is where we're going to put our textures. Okay. So that's where I'm going to save my texture that I just pulled up. So here, save image as, and then I'm going to go into my folder, Scene Assets Images. Now, don't leave it with these funky number names and stuff. Name this something that's easy. Okay, so this is wood floor, and this is what the main color we designate as a base file. Okay, it's a base color file, so wood floor base. Okay, so now if we come back into Max, so we want to plug this into our base color. The base color, which is right here, this is the color of our material. Okay. And instead of doing color, we're going to load a bitmap in here. So where it says base color, click pull out, general tab, bitmap. Okay, and it'll open right up. And if you set this up correctly, it'll open up right in here. And there's our wood that we saved, and we can open that. Okay, so right off the bat, it's going to go on to our object. Now, if we double click on this, we can bring it up larger. And I'm just going to move this out of my way for right now. All right. So now the thing about this is this wood is way out of scale. Okay. And this is the thing that people kind of really struggle with, especially people who's not worked with wood very much. They don't understand, what do you mean is out of scale? Well, if this is 14 feet deep and 20 feet, this wood is like mega giant wood. It's not the right scale, so we need to fix that. So by default, a primitives has mapping coordinates, and what I mean by mapping coordinates is it's actually projecting like it with a projector, projecting the texture onto it, and we're going to fix that. So we're going to come over here to our modifier list, and we're going to type in U, and it's going to isolate the U's, and we want to get this UVW map. Now by default, nothing changed because it just matched what was there. Okay, but what we're going to do now is right down here on our alignment tools, we're going to get one called bitmap fit. And what that's going to do is going to take my mapping coordinate, which there's a little gizmo on here. Before I do this, I'll show you. If I open this up and I get this little gizmo right here, I can slide this around, and this is this projection that's just projecting onto it. Okay, now this throws people off sometimes because they'll have this selected and then they're moving the object around. We don't want to move the object, we want to move the gizmo, which is the mapping coordinate. Okay, so when I do bitmap fit and I pick this bitmap, you're going to see this mapping coordinate will change because it's stretching it right now. Let's make this smaller so you can kind of see. So as soon as I click open, then it changed it. Okay, now you'll see it's square because on my material square. So now I can right click on this and go scale, click inside here, and I can scale this down, and I want to scale it down to get the wood approximately the size that a plank of wood would actually be on this floor, which would be something sort of like that. Now can you see how this is real shiny across here? We're going to fix that too. Okay, that's called a roughness map. Okay, so this looks pretty good. Okay, now what I want to do is make a roughness map. Okay, so we're just going to rotate this so I can kind of see this shininess, and then I'll show you how this is going to change. Okay, so we're going to go back to Photoshop, and let's go new. Okay, so I'm going to go open, and I'm going to open up that texture map, okay, that I created. So my documents, go into my wood floor, and go into my scene assets, and go into my images, and I want to say all documents, and there it is. Let's actually do large icons. There's my wood floor. Let's open it, and I have this open in Photoshop. Okay. So now I'm going to duplicate this. So I'm just going to drag this down onto my little X down here. I'll duplicate it. Okay, and I'm going to double click this, and this is going to be our roughness map. Okay, and this one I'm going to unlock, and I'm going to name this one. This is our base color. This is our base color map. So we need a base color map. We need a roughness map. Okay, the roughness map needs to be in black and white. So we're just going to take this layer and go to image, adjustments, desaturate, and it's black and white. Now when I use this, if I use it just like this, this object would be really, really shiny, because everywhere that it's black, the shininess is on, and everywhere it's white, it's rough. And really, wood is not really, really shiny. So what we're going to do is put a levels adjustment layer on this. So if we go down here with this selected and click this little kind of half moon, and we can say levels, and then so put us a level control on it. Now, right off the bat, if I start doing this, it's going to adjust everything down below it. We only wanted to adjust this roughness, so we want to click this button right here, and now it will only affect the roughness and not the base color. Okay, you don't want to mess with the bottom ones now for what we're doing. This one makes everything darker. This one makes everything lighter. And then this is in between. So what we want to do is start dragging this far one over to lighten this up. And then we can drag this over a little bit. And so what this is going to mean is the majority of this is going to be non-glossy, and then the dark areas will be more glossy. Okay. And we can always come back in here and readjust this. So I'm just going to leave it at that and kind of see what we like, and we can always come back and change it and adjust it. All right, so we're going to save this out. So we're just going to export this as a PNG. Okay, and we'll send it right back into that folder that we were using. Wood floor, scene assets, images, and now we're going to call this floor base roughness. That tells us it's our roughness map. Okay, so now if we go back into 3ds Max, and I'm leaving this so I can see this sheen so that you can see how this is going to change it. So in our material editor here, okay, and by the way, all this information over here is in your right click menu. So if I go out here and I right click, and you see what says materials in general, this is the same list that's over here. So I have a tendency to cut this off to get me more space, but if you need it back, it's just this button right here. Okay, this button is the one on the right. So we need this one because it's all our controls. Okay, but I don't really need this one because if I know what I'm doing and I need something, I can right click and I can go in here and I can get all that information. Of course, I can always turn back on. All right, so what we can do here is in Max, anytime you hold down the Shift key and you move something or rotate it or scale it, it makes a clone. So if I just hold down the Shift key and I drag it down, I can make a copy of this. Okay, so make sure this has got a ring around it and it's not this one. Okay, then over here, I can change the bitmap and I'm going to load this roughness into here. And then what I'm going to do is plug it into our roughness. And then I'm going to make this smaller so we can kind of see. Okay, now by default, I can't see it in here. If I go right where this says standard right up here and I right click and make this high quality, okay, then I'm going to be able to see my roughness in here. And now you can see how this is kind of breaking up that where some parts are shiny and some parts are glossy. And that looks more believable, like something would actually be that way instead of it all being the same kind of sheen on it. And that's our roughness map, okay? And the other thing is you can always come in here and invert it. And you can invert it in Photoshop, but I can also invert it in here. So if I go in here and I slide down where it says output right here, I can tell it to invert it here. And so now it's going to make it just the opposite. What was glossy, and then it's the opposite. So we invert that. Okay. I usually do it in Photoshop, but you can't do it in here. And there are times I do that on the fly. Okay. So now we've got our roughness map. Okay. The next thing we need to do is generate a normal map, which is a textural map. Okay. The next thing we need to do is we need to launch Substance Designer. Substance Designer is going to allow us to make a normal map. So let's go into Substance Designer. So I'm going to launch that. And while that's launching, I'm going to pause my video. Okay, so I've got Substance Designer open here. Now, Substance makes several things. I make Substance Designer, Substance Painter, Substance Sampler. We use all of these, but this one is really easy to make normal maps. So when we come in here, we want to click this button up here. It says New Substance Graph, and there's all kinds of presets in here. We want the default one, Metallic Roughness. That's what we want, okay? Then we can name our, now what this is going to do is, you know, they're doing, creating a collection called a graph. You could kind of think of as layers in Photoshop. It's creating several things. And this is what it's going to name it. Okay. So I would name this for what we're doing. So we'll just call this wood floor, something like that. Then here's the sizes. Now the bitmap that I am using, okay, if I go in here and I go image size and we change it to pixels, you'll see it's 1024 by 1024. Sometimes we might want to do bigger ones like 2048s, but really for a tileable ground plane where we're tiling it down smaller, a 1024 is fine. So we'll just change this to a 1024. And then we just click OK, and that will create our little interface to create our texture. Okay. So what we have by default is a three-dimensional object over here, and it's the same thing as Max. And to tumble around, it's it's Alt left button is to tumble around this, and then Alt center button to move it around. Okay, this over here is my 2D view. Okay, and then this is my nose structure, and we're only going to be messing with the normal map, so this is all the one that we need to mess with. Okay, and you'll see this says wood floor over here. All right, so now the thing we need to do is we need to drag and drop our bitmap in here. So we need to open up the folder where we have our images, and we need to get the color image, and we're going to drag it and just drop it into this palette right up here. It's going to ask you two things. We want to do a link resource. And then you'll see it over here. Okay, now that we brought this in this area right here, there's a button right down here to make this tileable, and we probably want to turn that off. Yours might be off where it comes in like this. This is tileable where we can look at it and you can see it's a tileable texture, but I just want to see the texture and we can zoom in. Okay, so when we bring this in, we want to convert this. Okay, the first thing we want to do is convert this to black and white. Now, we have lots of ways to do that, but the easiest way, instead of trying to memorize all these buttons up here, is just we want to pick it, okay, and then if you hit the space bar, a search panel will come up. Okay, so it's just a toggle. Just click on your space bar. And we want to create this to grayscale. So if you type in gray, then you'll see grayscale conversion, and I click on that. Now notice how it clicked this, linked it together. Okay. That's because I had this selected. If I don't have this selected and I hit the space bar and I type in gray, then it'll bring the node in, but they're not connected, okay? Which is okay, because then we just connect them. But I just wanted to let you know, if you have it selected, it'll connect it automatically. If you don't, it just brings it in, okay? So I'm going to select this one now, and I want to put a levels adjustment. This is really, we're doing the same thing we were doing over in Photoshop. What we're putting a levels on top of this. We're doing the same thing over here. So with this selected, I hit the space bar, we type in levels, and I put this node in, and now this is going to go directly into our normal map. Okay, our color map, converting it to grayscale, a level so we can adjust how much dark and light everything is, and then into the normal map. Now we want to see the normal map here. So when you're on this node, if you right click, you go view, output in 2D view, and then we'll see it in here. Okay. And you can see it on our cube over here too. Okay. Now you can switch these over here to what it's, like we want to look at it on a sphere. If we want to look at it on a plane. Okay. To see what it's doing onto our ground plane. Okay. All right, so now we're ready to adjust this, because by default it's way too much texture for our floor. So what we're going to do is click on levels. Okay, now there's a difference between double clicking, because if I double click, it's going to go here. I double click on this one, it's going to go here. Okay, so I want to see the normal map, but then I'm clicking here so that I can adjust here, but I'm seeing this one. So the way I do it, it doesn't make it right or wrong, I just kind of zoom in a little bit. Now, if I take the white over here and I start pulling it over, okay, at a certain point, it's going to start dropping out. You'll see parts of this dropping out. And so what I initially like to do is to pull it over so that it's not having texture in every place on here, that it's just certain places. So it seems more organic to me. Whereas if I leave this all the way up, then the center one's just adjusting how much, but it's the same pattern all the way across it. So I initially like to pull the white over so we can get to a certain point where it's starting to drop out like this. Okay. By the way, your center mouse button, you move this around. So I have certain areas that the bump is not going to be in. Now, the other thing that always threw me off is it always seems like it's the opposite of what it is, that what's coming up or going back, okay? Now, this is too much, okay? So we drag the mid-level down, so we just have a little bit like that. That's a much better normal map, or the mounted normal map, okay? So that looks pretty good. Got some areas where it's broken up, where it's not going to have any depth, and then all these are going to be, these will all be little divots into the surface. It looks like they're coming up, but they're actually going down. It's the opposite of what it looks like. Okay, and I'm going to go with something about like that, and then it's ready to go. All right, so you go right up here where this says wood floor, and you right click, and we're going to go export outputs. Now by default, it's going to export out everything, okay? And we don't want everything. All we want is the normal map. So if you just click material here and turn this off, and then we want to only do the normal. The default is a PNG, which is what we want. So the only thing we need to do is our destination right here, where we're going to put it. So we need to put an output, and this is where we're going to put it back into our scene assets images folder. So that's in my documents, wood floor, scene assets, images. Okay, select that folder, and by default, whatever we named our node up here, you'll see right here it says preview, and I'm going to click the normal, and you'll see it's going to call it wood floor normal. You can come in here and change the name of it right here, but by default, whatever I have this node, so if we name our node, that's what it's going to be. By the way, you can rename this node. I'll show you in a second. Okay, just hit export outputs. You know, it'll just take a second because it's really quick and it's done. By the way, if you didn't name this before when we made it, you can always right click and rename it here to be whatever you want it to be. Then I would tell you to go ahead and save this, okay? And that way you can come back to this later, this setup, and you can open this and come back into it, okay? All right, so that's our normal map. So let's go look at that in Photoshop. So now we can come in here into Photoshop, go open. And there's our normal map. We can open it. And then what I'm going to do is drag it and put it right over the top of this. And I'm holding my shift key, and it's going to go right back over the top. And this is my normal map. So what I'm doing is creating a file that has all of my maps into it. This is my construction file. This is where I would come back if I want to manipulate it and change it later. Okay, so then we would save this, and so we're going to go File, Save As. I save them as TIFF files. You can either save it as a TIFF file or a Photoshop file. I don't use Photoshop files anymore because TIFFs are universal. So a TIFF is a universal file format. A Photoshop is proprietary to Adobe, and so a software company, if you're using something besides Photoshop, they have to pay for a license. They pay for a license to be able to write a Photoshop. So some of them, if they're fairly inexpensive, they won't do that. So I use TIFF files. A TIFF and a Photoshop file stores all the exact same information. Okay, the thing we care about here is it's saving layers. So I'm just going to call this my wooden floor. And I know I'm going to put it in my scene assets images. This is a TIFF file. I never use a TIFF file for a texture because it's got layers in it. Okay, but I'm just going to put it in with the other files in here and hit save. And it's going to save all of my layers. Okay, so now we're ready to go back into Max. And now we're ready to put our normal map in. So I can do the same thing I did before. I can just hold down the shift key and I can drag this down. And now I'm going to go over here and switch to our normal map. Now, you can't plug a normal map directly into this bump, okay, because a bump map can be a normal map or it can be a black and white bump. So there's different kinds of bumps. So what we want to do is to click in this little node here and drag out. And why is it giving me a hard time? There it goes. And then we want to let up and we want to go to the general tab and we want to get this one called a normal bump. And then we plug into that. And it's crunching a little bit. Come on. There we go. Okay, now by default, since this material is not by default set up for normal maps, it's going to have the bump turned down. So we need to go down here where it says bump, and this should be set at 1. Okay. Close that. And so now this is going to have a bump map on it. Now, we want to put a light in here so we can see this better. Okay, so what we're going to do is go over to our create and we're going to go to lights and we're going to say a free light. Now it's going to ask me a question here. We're using Arnold, which is an advanced renderer, and basically what this is asking me is, do I want to put a physical camera exposure control? If you were a photographer and you had a real camera, and I mean by a real camera, I'm talking about a real camera, I'm not talking about like an iPhone, okay? The camera has an exposure control built into it where the exposure control is how much light you're letting hit into the camera. In our case, the camera is like our eyes, so it's how much light am I letting go into my eye, okay? And you want to be able to control that. You want to control that separate from the light. So the way you can think of it is like a light. We put a light in a room. Well, we can adjust how bright the light is, but when I'm in the room, I can squint with my eyes and I can control how much light I let goes into my eye, and that's what the physical exposure control is. So yes, we want that. All right, so I can just click right here in the center and I can place a light, and you will see immediately it starts working. Now, just so you understand, I'm going to delete this light. Right now, Max has lights in the scene so that we can see it. Otherwise, this would be black. So it has its own lights built into the scene. They're just dummy lights. We can't grab them. We can't adjust them. They're just so we can see when we're modeling. Okay, but as soon as I put a light in here, it deletes them. So as soon as I click to place a light, it deletes them, and this is the only light. Now, by default, the lights are always on the floor. Okay, we want to right click so we don't create another light, and then we want to right click to move, and we want to move it up. Okay. Now, the other thing is we want to control this light. So we want to go to the modify panel, and just, I remember if I covered, I did in class, you can drag the edge of this so that you can have a tab or 2 tabs or 3 tabs. Usually we only need 2. Okay. All right, in color. Okay, lights are specific colors, which are measured by Kelvin. So we want to click this Kelvin on, and then the light color is based on the color temperature of something, okay? We want it to be neutral. Neutral is 6600. So 6600 is white and is a neutral, so it's not going to be throwing color into here. As I lower the Kelvin, it's going to make it warmer. Okay, as I up the Kelvin, it's going to make it bluer. Okay, we want it neutral, 6600. Okay, we do not want to touch, we don't want to be putting colors in here because lights don't have colors. Okay, right here by default, this is a point light. We really don't want a point light. That's saying that the light comes from a grain of sand, and light doesn't come from a grain of sand. Light comes from a light bulb, and it has a reflector. Normally, if we were inside of a room, we would use like a rectangle. And you'll notice if I do a rectangle, it'll say it's 4 foot by 2 foot. And that's because that's the size of a fluorescent light that's in a office building, is it's a 4 foot by 2 foot light. So now you can see I can move this around. Now make sure that you've turned this into high quality here, because by default this is standard, and so this light doesn't light anything because we're trying to optimize. So we're going to go high quality. The other thing I want to do is right click on this, and I want to go down here to the materials, and I want this to say realistic materials with maps. And so now as I get in on this, you can see my bump is happening. Okay. And we can look at these one by one if we want to. So we can come in here, and let's get in here, and we want to make sure we have the material selected. So I can come into here and I can turn these on and off. So here's where my bump is. Here's where my base color is. Here's where my roughness is. So I can turn the bump off. I can turn the base color off. So all I have is the roughness. And so you can see as the light's hitting this, some areas are a little bit more reflective than others. Okay, so I turn the roughness off. I can turn the bump on. So now I'm just going to be able to see the bump that's on there. Okay. If I turn the bump on and the roughness, and so I'm seeing the bump and seeing how the light is going to skate across that surface. Like so. And then if I turn the base color back on, then the color is going to go in there. Okay, now the reality is when we got this in our viewport, this is still just kind of a proxy, and this really is an approximation of what it would look like in the Unreal Engine in a gaming environment. Okay, if you want to see a high quality of this, okay, so what we want to do is let's initially go in here and add some more light in here. So if we go up under our rendering up here and we go to exposure control, this is where it was creating the exposure control that we said. You'll see it right here. This is what it did, is it turned this on for us. Now I'm going to hit this little render preview, and it's going to render me a preview in here. And this allows me to kind of adjust what's going on out here. Now right here, this says use physical camera controls if available. This means when I put a camera in my scene, then it links the exposure to the camera. For the most part, I don't want that, so I'm going to uncheck this. So here, it's going to give me a global exposure, which means when I adjust this, it's going to adjust the entire room, not just one camera. So when I go up with this, it's going to get it darker, and when I go down with it, it's going to let more light in. So what we want to do here, and we didn't finish setting up our light. So when we pick our light over here, and I told you to make it 6600 so it's neutral. By default, this is doing candelabras. Now, there are different measurements according to where you are in the world. Some do lumens, LM is lumens. Some do CD, which is candelas, and not candelabras, candelas, and LX is lux. Okay, so we're using candelas. So if we type in 150, this is kind of like a 150 watt light bulb. Okay, and you'll see it's kind of dark in here. And that's why I want to come in here and adjust this so it's hotter here. So this is how much light that we're letting in. Okay. And then this is the light in our scene. Now, we may decide that since this is bright this way, we might drag this over here. Now I can hold down the shift key and I can make a clone of this and make a copy. Now, sometimes we want it to be an instance. Now, an instance, what that does, it means if I adjust one, it adjusts the other one. Matter of fact, let's do this one as an instance so I can show you. And what that means is if I turn down the intensity of this one, okay, it's going to turn down the intensity of that one because they're clones of each other. So this is really a benefit when I'm lighting a room, because a lot of times we'll have like a ceiling that may have 10 lights in the ceiling. And if we do them all as instances, then I only have to adjust one and adjust all of them. Okay. You'll notice that when I click on the floor, you'll see the word box here, and it's not bold. But when I click on this light, you'll see this is in bold. That means it's an instance. I can always tell it to not be an instance. I can right click on it here and say make unique, and then I can break the bond between these where I can adjust one as separate. Which really, to a certain degree, if you get really deep into architecture, what you'll find is that the colors of one set of light bulbs to another set of light bulbs based on how old they are and based on when they were put in here, their colors will be a little bit off. And so this one may be a little bit more blue. This one may be a little bit more warm. Okay. And so they are slight color differences. And when you get into really, really high end, that makes a little bit of difference. So that's, it doesn't just look digital. Okay, that was the extent of what I wanted us to get done for the first lecture. This is just a quick overview of we make a piece of geometry, we make textures, we make lights. The main textures that we make is we need a base color map, we need a roughness map, and we need a normal map. Now later on we might do a metalness map, okay, and that means whether something is made of metal or it's not made of metal. Our floor is not, so we didn't need a metalness map for this, but some things may be, let's say we had the floor, but it had nails on it. So we would generate a bitmap that would be white where it's not metal. I'm sorry, black where it's not metal and white where it is metal. So we'd have a black map with little white nails on it, and it would tell it that the nails were metal. But we'll use that. We'll come across that as we go. You're all going to be solving different problems as we go. Okay, so we want to save this. Okay, save as, and we'll just call this wooden floor. It'll automatically put it in your scenes folder. Now the other thing that you want to do, and as a matter of fact, we'll just come in here real quick and we'll just make it, let's just make us a little sphere in here. And let's go to the front so we can see, to make sure it's sitting right on the ground. Okay, back to our perspective. And we can make, let's just make another material for this. Okay, so I'm just going to right click. You don't have to do this, I'm just showing you this. Physical material, and on this one, I'm going to say this is, there are default settings in here that we can use, which I'm going to do for right now. And I'm just going to say this is a solid piece of glass. And so I'm going to apply that to it. And it won't look that great in my viewport, but if I go up here to Arnold renderer and I hit render, then it's going to look what it'll look like in being rendered through Arnold. And you'll see that it's making a piece of glass in there. And this is an active renderer too. So what it means is if I tumble around in my viewport here, it'll update. And so I think I want to move this. Let's put it, say, right about there. And then you'll see that there's a little bit of a blue tint to this, and it's going through and it's casting on the ground right there. So this is a progressive render. So when it gets all the way down here, then it's finished. And by the way, you can save snapshots of these when you're testing out your material. So there's a little camera right here. So if I click the camera, it saved a photo of this, a little capture. So like if I then move this, it's going to re-render that. You'll see your percentage down here. So we're waiting for that to get fully rendered. When it gets fully rendered, you can click your snapshot. So now I have a snapshot here, but if I click on this one, it's back over there. If I click on it once, it's active. I click on it again, it deactivates it. Okay, so if I do another render. So this allows you to make changes. Okay, and then I can save the image out for like posting on the forum or something. Okay, that's what we got. hope that helped you. If you can get that done before we come in, then we can go on to the next thing. All right. Thank you very much. Thanks for sharing your time with me today. Hope this helped you. Thank you.